Daddy, I had a bad dream.
Touch my child again and you're gone.
Imani's hands were shaking as she locked up the custodial closet and headed back to work. She had 3 more hours of her shift at Lincoln Elementary, then a 4-hour shift at Mercy General Hospital, and then she was supposed to go home and sleep for maybe 3 hours before starting all over again tomorrow. Except, tomorrow night she wouldn't be going to sleep. Tomorrow night she'd be going to a mansion in the wealthiest neighborhood in the city to take care of 2 traumatized children she'd met once, for one night, in the midst of a crisis she'd accidentally stumbled into. What had she been thinking? Saying yes? She wasn't qualified for this. She wasn't stable enough for this. She was a woman who worked herself to exhaustion to avoid dealing with her own trauma, and now she was supposed to help 2 children deal with theirs? But when she closed her eyes, she saw Minjun and Sora, saw the fear in their eyes that she recognized like looking in a mirror, saw the desperate hope when she'd taught them to breathe, saw the way they'd finally relaxed into sleep, trusting her to keep watch. She'd felt something in that bedroom, something she hadn't felt in 12 years. Like maybe her pain could mean something. Like maybe surviving Keisha and Marcus's deaths didn't have to be just about punishment and guilt. Like maybe she could take the worst thing that had ever happened to her and use it to help someone else survive the worst thing that had ever happened to them. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Jin-Woo Park. Thank you again for agreeing to help. The address is 1847 Lakeshore Drive. Security code is 7729. I'll have Mrs. Chen, the current nanny, brief you tomorrow evening. Also, I meant what I said about the health insurance. I'll have my HR department send you the enrollment forms. Please don't hesitate to use it." Imani stared at the message. Health insurance. She hadn't had health insurance since she'd aged out of the foster system at 18. She'd been to the emergency room twice in the last 12 years, both times leaving with bills she was still paying off in tiny increments. The idea of being able to see a doctor without worrying about the cost was almost incomprehensible. She typed back a simple, "Thank you," and pocketed her phone. The rest of her shift at Lincoln Elementary passed in a blur. She mopped floors and emptied trash cans and cleaned bathrooms, her mind only half on the work. The other half was spinning through everything that could go wrong. What if the twins had another panic attack and she couldn't help them this time? What if they realized she was a fraud who'd just gotten lucky? What if Jin-Woo Park decided she was too unstable and fired her after one night? By the time she got to Mercy General Hospital for her evening shift, she was exhausted and anxious and seriously considering calling Jin-Woo Park and telling him she'd changed her mind. But then she walked past the pediatric ward, and through the window she saw a little girl, maybe 6 years old, sitting up in a hospital bed with her mother asleep in the chair beside her. The girl looked scared and lonely and awake in a way that reminded Imani of Sora. Imani thought about that little girl lying in a hospital bed, afraid and unable to sleep. She thought about Minjun and Sora sitting up every night for 6 months, terrified of the darkness. She thought about all the children in the world who were scared and hurting and just needed someone to sit with them and acknowledge that the fear was real and valid and survivable. She pulled out her phone and texted Jin-Woo Park. "I'll be there tomorrow at 8. I promise." His response came immediately. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to us." But she did know, because she remembered what it felt like to be drowning in trauma and have someone throw you a lifeline. She'd never gotten that lifeline, but maybe she could be that person for someone else. Imani finished her shift at the hospital, took 2 buses home, and fell into bed at 1 in the morning. She had to be up at 6 for her shift at Lincoln Elementary. 5 hours of sleep if she was lucky. She set 3 alarms and closed her eyes. She dreamed about the fire. She always dreamed about the fire. Keisha calling her name, Marcus crying, the smoke filling her lungs. The moment she realized she couldn't get to them. The knowledge that they were dying and it was her fault. She woke up at 5:30, 20 minutes before her first alarm, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. She sat on the edge of her bed head in her hands, and practiced the box breathing she'd taught the twins. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, 4 counts hold. It helped. Not much, but enough to get her heart rate back to something resembling normal. This was her life. This had been her life for 12 years. Work until she was too exhausted to think. Sleep just long enough to have nightmares. Wake up and start again. It was punishment and penance, and the only way she knew how to exist in a world where her siblings were gone and she was still here. But tonight, she was going to try something different. She was going to sit with 2 children who were trapped in the same cycle she was, and she was going to show them that there was a way to survive it, even if she hadn't figured out how to do more than survive herself. The day passed slowly. Imani went through the motions at Lincoln Elementary, cleaning classrooms and hallways while her mind was elsewhere. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed. "You seem distracted today," she said when Imani stopped by the office to check her timesheet. "I'm fine," Imani said automatically. Then, because Mrs. Rodriguez had always been kind to her, she added, "Actually, I took on a second evening job. I'm a little nervous about it." "Another cleaning job?" "Not exactly. Childcare. Overnight." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyebrows went up. "That's quite a change from cleaning. Are you qualified?" "No," Imani said honestly. "But the children need someone who understands trauma, and I understand that." Mrs. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. The children who lost their mother. The Park twins. Imani shouldn't have been surprised that Mrs. Rodriguez had put it together. She was observant and kind and paid attention to the people around her in a way most people didn't. "Yes," Imani said. "Those poor babies. I can't imagine what they've been through." Mrs. Rodriguez reached out and squeezed Imani's hand. "You'll be good for them. You have a kind heart, even if you try to hide it." Imani felt her throat tighten. "What if I'm not good for them? What if I make things worse?" "Then you try again. Children don't need perfect, Imani. They need present. And from what I've seen, you know how to show up, even when it's hard." Imani nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She finished her shift, declined Mrs. Rodriguez's offer of leftover cafeteria pizza, and headed home to change before going to the Park mansion. Her studio apartment felt even smaller than usual when she walked in. She looked around at the space that had been her entire world for the last 4 years. A bed that pulled down from the wall, a tiny kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, a bathroom the size of a closet, and everywhere, photos of Keisha and Marcus. On the walls, on the nightstand, on the refrigerator, she'd created a shrine to her guilt. A constant reminder of what she'd lost and why she didn't deserve to have anything more than this bare minimum existence. Imani changed into clean clothes, simple black pants, and a comfortable sweater. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had she gotten so tired? When had the shadows under her eyes become permanent? When had she stopped being a person and started being a ghost? Her phone buzzed. Another text from Jin-Woo Park. "Mrs. Chen will meet you at the gate at 8. The twins have been asking about you all day. Sora drew you a picture. Minjun wants to show you his rock collection. No pressure, but they're very excited you're coming back." Imani read the message 3 times. The twins were excited. They'd been asking about her. Sora had drawn her a picture. When was the last time anyone had been excited to see her? When was the last time she'd mattered to someone? She grabbed her bag, locked her apartment, and headed for the bus stop. 3 buses, and 90 minutes later, she was standing outside the gates of 1847 Lakeshore Drive, staring up at a mansion that was bigger than her entire apartment building. The gates opened automatically as she approached, some sensor detecting her presence. She walked up the long driveway, her footsteps loud on the pristine pavement, feeling completely out of place in this world of manicured lawns and fountain features and security cameras tracking her every move. A woman was waiting at the front door. Mrs. Chen, the nanny Jin-Woo had mentioned. She was in her 60s, with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. "You must be Imani," Mrs. Chen said, extending her hand. I'm so glad you're here. Come in, come in. Imani shook her hand and followed her into a foyer that was larger than her entire apartment. Marble floors, a chandelier that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. Artwork on the walls that looked like it belonged in a museum. I know it's overwhelming, Mrs. Chen said, noticing Imani's wide eyes. I felt the same way when I started, but the house is just a house. The important part is the children. How are they? Imani asked. Better than they've been in months. They slept again last night. Not as deeply as the first night with you, but they slept. And they've been asking about you constantly. When is Imani coming? Is it 8 o'clock yet? Did she forget about us? Mrs. Chen smiled. You made quite an impression. I didn't do anything special. You did something no one else has been able to do. You gave them hope. Mrs. Chen led Imani through the mansion, pointing out important rooms. Kitchen is through there, living room, study, Mr. Park's office, which is off limits unless there's an emergency, the twins' playroom, and upstairs their bedrooms. Bedrooms plural? I thought they shared a room. They used to, but after their mother died, they couldn't bear to be separated. So Mr. Park converted the playroom into a second bedroom and put the beds close enough that they can hold hands between them. Mrs. Chen's voice was soft with sympathy. They're good children, bright and sweet and so brave, even when they don't feel brave. They reached the second floor, and Imani could hear voices coming from one of the rooms. Young voices, excited and nervous. Is that her? Sora's voice. I think so. Minjun. What if she doesn't like us anymore? She came back, didn't she? That means she likes us. Mrs. Chen knocked gently on the doorframe. Minjun, Sora, there's someone here to see you. The door flew open, and there they were. The twins, looking exactly as Imani remembered them, but somehow more vibrant in the light of early evening than they'd been in the darkness of a panic attack. Minjun's eyes were bright with hope. Sora was clutching a piece of paper, clearly the drawing Jin-Woo had mentioned. You came back, Minjun said, and the relief in his voice made Imani's chest ache. I promised I would, didn't I? Sora stepped forward shyly, holding out the drawing. I made this for you. Imani took the picture carefully, looking at it with genuine attention. It showed 3 figures, drawn in crayon with the unmistakable style of a 7-year-old. 2 small figures with black hair, holding hands, and 1 taller figure with brown skin and kind eyes, standing beside them. Above them, Sora had drawn stars and a moon, and in careful letters she'd written, Imani teached us to breathe. This is beautiful, Imani said, her voice catching. Can I keep it? Sora nodded enthusiastically. I made it special for you. See, those are the stars we can see from our window. And that's you, keeping us safe. Imani knelt down so she was at eye level with the twins. I can't promise to keep you safe from everything, but I can promise to sit with you when you're scared. Is that okay? That's better than safe, Minjun said seriously. Safe is what Dad tries to do with all the cameras and locks, but you make us feel like it's okay to be scared. Because it is okay to be scared. Being scared means you survived something that hurt you. Your fear is proof that you're still here, still fighting. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat gently. I should go. Mr. Park is in his office if you need anything. The twins have already had dinner, but there are snacks in the kitchen if they get hungry later. Bedtime is technically 8:30, but we've been flexible given the circumstances. Thank you, Imani said. I'll take good care of them. Mrs. Chen smiled. I know you will. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I can tell when someone has a gift for this work. You have it, even if you don't believe it yourself. After Mrs. Chen left, Imani found herself alone with Minjun and Sora for the first time since that chaotic night 3 days ago. They stared at each other for a moment, an awkward triangle of uncertainty. So, Imani said, your dad mentioned something about a rock collection? Minjun's face lit up. You want to see it? Really? Really. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a shelf in the playroom, where hundreds of rocks were arranged in careful categories. He began explaining each one with the kind of intense focus that Imani recognized from her own childhood hyperfixations. Sedimentary versus igneous versus metamorphic. The geological history of each specimen. Where he'd found them, or who had given them to him. Sora sat nearby, watching her brother with a soft smile, occasionally adding details he'd forgotten. And Imani listened, really listened, to a 7-year-old boy explain the difference between granite and basalt with more passion than most adults brought to their entire careers. This was good, she thought. This was normal. This was two children sharing something they loved with someone who cared enough to pay attention. Maybe she could do this after all. The evening passed more easily than Imani had expected. After the rock collection tour, Sora showed her the elaborate fairy garden she was building in a terrarium, complete with tiny furniture made from twigs and moss. They played a board game that had rules so complicated Imani was certain the twins were making up half of them. But she went along with it anyway, because they were laughing and that seemed more important than winning. At 8:30, right on schedule, both children started yawning, but the yawns were quickly followed by tension. Imani watched as their bodies went rigid, as the laughter faded from their faces, as the familiar fear crept back into their eyes. Bedtime, Minjun said flatly, like he was announcing an execution. We don't have to sleep, Imani said carefully. We can just rest, get comfortable, see what happens. That's what everyone says, Sora whispered. But then they leave, and we're alone, and the dark comes, and we remember everything. I'm not leaving. I'll be right here, just like last time. You promise? I promise. The twins went through their nighttime routine with the mechanical precision of soldiers preparing for battle, brushing teeth, changing into pajamas, arranging their stuffed animals in specific positions on their beds. Every action was precise and controlled, like if they did everything exactly right, maybe tonight would be different. Imani watched from the doorway, understanding that this ritual was about control. In a world where terrible things happened randomly and without warning, controlling the small things felt like the only power they had. Finally, they climbed into their beds, reaching across the gap between them to hold hands. The gesture made Imani's throat tight. They were so young to have learned that the only person you could really count on was the person who'd survived the same nightmare as you. Can you tell us about your siblings? Minjun asked as Imani settled into the chair between their beds. You said their names were Keisha and Marcus. Imani was surprised by the question. Most people avoided talking about the dead, like mentioning them would somehow make the grief worse. But maybe the twins understood that sometimes talking about the people you lost was the only way to keep them real. What do you want to know? Were they nice? Sora asked. They were the best. Keisha was 6 when she died. She loved animals, especially frogs. She used to catch them in the park and name them, and then cry when we had to let them go. Marcus was 4. He was obsessed with firefighters, had a plastic fire truck he carried everywhere. Do you still think about them? Every single day. Does it hurt every time? Minjun's voice was small. Yes, Imani said honestly, but it's a different kind of hurt now. At first, it felt like I was being torn apart every time I thought about them. Now it's more like a bruise. Still painful, but I know it won't destroy me. How long did it take to get to the bruise part? Years, and I'm still not all the way there. Some days are worse than others. Sora was quiet for a moment, then said, Our mom liked to bake. She made these chocolate chip cookies that were perfect, crispy on the edges, soft in the middle. She always let us eat the dough even though she said we weren't supposed to. She sounds wonderful. She was. She sang all the time. In the car, in the kitchen, in the shower. Dad used to joke that she didn't know how to be quiet. Sora's voice cracked. Now, our house is too quiet. What was her favorite song? Imani asked. Dancing Queen by ABBA. She said it was cheesy, but she didn't care. She'd dance around the kitchen and make us dance with her, even when we were embarrassed. I bet she was a good dancer. She was terrible, Minjun said, and there was the tiniest hint of a smile in his voice. She had no rhythm, but she didn't care. She said dancing was about joy, not skill. She sounds like she was very wise. She was, Sora said. She told us that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing things even when you were scared, kind of like what you said. Your mom was right, and I bet she'd be really proud of how brave you've both been. We don't feel brave, Minjun said. Brave people rarely do. Brave feels like being terrified but showing up anyway, which is exactly what you do every single night. They talked for another hour, the twins sharing memories of their mother in fragments. The way she always burned toast, her terrible jokes, the faces she made when she was concentrating, how she always knew when they were lying, the sound of her laugh. Imani listened, understanding that this was a sacred act. They were keeping their mother alive through stories, making sure that she wasn't just the woman who died, but the woman who lived, who loved them, who danced badly and sang off-key and made perfect cookies. Around 10 o'clock, Sora's eyes started to droop. She fought it for a while, clearly afraid of what would happen if she let go. But eventually, exhaustion won. Her breathing deepened, her hand relaxed in her brother's grip, and she slipped into sleep. Minjun lasted another 30 minutes, talking quietly about his rock collection, about a science project he wanted to do, about anything except the fear that was waiting for him in the darkness. But finally, he too surrendered. Imani sat in the chair between their beds, watching them sleep like she'd done 3 nights ago. She pulled out the drawing Sora had made for her, studying it in the dim glow of the nightlight, 2 small figures and 1 larger one, standing under the stars. Imani teached us to breathe. She'd taught them to breathe. It seemed like such a small thing. But maybe that was the point. Maybe healing wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic breakthroughs. Maybe it was about small moments, about breathing through panic attacks, about sharing memories, about showing up night after night and proving through presence that you weren't going to disappear. Her phone buzzed softly. A text from Jin-Woo Park. I'm watching on the monitor. Thank you for talking about their mother with them. Most people try to avoid the subject, but you let them remember out loud. That's a gift. Imani felt uncomfortable knowing he was watching, but she understood it too. He was a father who'd failed to protect his family once. Of course, he was going to monitor every moment now, looking for threats, for signs that something was wrong. She texted back, "They need to remember her. Memory is how we keep people alive." His response came quickly. "Yes, Catherine would have liked you." Imani didn't know how to respond to that, so she didn't. She pocketed her phone and settled deeper into the chair, preparing for a long night of keeping watch. Around midnight, Sora stirred. Her breathing quickened, and she made a small, distressed sound. Imani was on her feet immediately, moving to her bedside. "Sora," she said softly, "you're safe. You're in your room. I'm right here." Sora's eyes opened, unfocused and frightened. "The bad men are not here. You're safe. Can you do box breathing with me?" Sora nodded, and they breathed together. 4 counts in. 4 counts hold. 4 counts out. 4 counts hold. After 3 rounds, Sora's panic had subsided enough for her to speak coherently. "I dreamed about the kitchen. About Mom. Do you want to talk about it? She was calling for us, but we couldn't get to her. There was a door, but it was locked and we could hear her, but we couldn't help her." That sounds terrifying. It was. It is. I have that dream almost every night. Imani sat on the edge of Sora's bed, a calculated risk. Touch could be comforting or triggering, and she wasn't sure which it would be. But Sora immediately curled toward her, like a plant turning toward sunlight. "Can I tell you something?" Imani said. "About my nightmares?" Sora nodded. For years after the fire, I dreamed that I could save them. I dreamed that I woke up in time, that I got to their room, that I carried them out. And every time I woke up, I had to remember all over again that it didn't happen, that they died and I couldn't save them. Imani paused. Eventually, the dreams changed. I still dream about the fire sometimes. But now, instead of trying to save them, I dream about the good times. I dream about Keisha showing me frogs, about Marcus pretending to be a firefighter. The dreams are still sad because I wake up and they're gone, but they're not nightmares anymore. They're visits. How did you make them change? I didn't. Time did. And therapy, though I couldn't afford much of it. And telling stories about them while I was awake, so my brain had good memories to work with while I slept. We talk about Mom, Sora said, but it still gives me nightmares. 6 months isn't very long. It took me years before the nightmares started to shift. You're doing everything right. You just need to be patient with yourself. Minjun had woken up during their conversation. He was sitting up in bed, watching them with that too-old expression that broke Imani's heart every time she saw it. What if it takes forever? He asked. What if we never stop having nightmares? Then we learn to have them and still have good days. The nightmares don't get to be the only thing. They're part of your story, but they're not the whole story. What's the rest of our story? Sora asked. Whatever you make it. School, friends, rock collections, and fairy gardens. Learning to breathe through panic attacks. Growing up. Remembering your mom. Finding new things to love. All of it gets to be part of your story. They sat in silence for a while. Imani on the edge of Sora's bed, Minjun in his own bed watching them, the nightlight casting soft shadows across the room. Imani? Sora's voice was drowsy. Will you stay? Not just tonight. Will you keep coming back? Imani thought about her studio apartment, her 3 jobs, her carefully constructed life of exhaustion and avoidance. She thought about the walls she'd built around herself, the way she'd convinced herself that staying disconnected was safer than caring. And then, she looked at these 2 children who'd lost their mother and found a fragment of hope in a cleaning woman who understood loss. She thought about how it felt to matter to someone again, to be needed, to take her pain and make it mean something. Yes, she said, I'll keep coming back. Promise? Minjun asked. I promise. Both twins relaxed visibly. Sora's eyes were already closing again. Minjun lay back down, reaching across the gap to hold his sister's hand again. Imani, Minjun said, just before sleep claimed him. Thank you for not trying to fix us. You're not broken, Imani said softly. You're healing. There's a difference. She sat with them until they were both deeply asleep, then returned to her chair. Her phone buzzed again. Jin-Woo Park. I don't know how to thank you. You already did. You gave me health insurance and a purpose. That's more than enough. It's not nearly enough, but it's a start. Imani looked at the sleeping twins, at the way they held hands even in sleep, at the peaceful expressions on their faces. She looked at Sora's drawing, still clutched in her hand. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, saying she had a gift for this work, about Mrs. Chen saying she gave the children hope. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was what she was supposed to do with her pain. Not hide from it, not let it destroy her, but transform it into something that could help someone else survive. The rest of the night passed quietly. Sora woke once more around 3, but calmed quickly with breathing exercises and a few minutes of gentle conversation. Minjun slept through until 6, when the first rays of sunlight started filtering through the curtains. Imani was exhausted. She'd been awake for nearly 24 hours straight, but when both twins woke up and smiled at her, when they asked if she was coming back tonight, when Minjun said he'd slept better than he had in months, she felt something that had been missing from her life for 12 years. She felt like she mattered. Mrs. Chen arrived at 7:30 to take over morning duties. She took one look at Imani's exhausted face and insisted on driving her home, even though it was out of her way. You look dead on your feet, Mrs. Chen said as they drove through the early morning traffic. When was the last time you had a full night's sleep? Define full night. More than 4 hours at a time. Then I honestly can't remember. Mrs. Chen shook her head. You can't pour from an empty cup, Imani. If you're going to take care of those children, you need to take care of yourself too. I'm fine. You're running on fumes and stubbornness. I recognize it because I've been there. Mrs. Chen glanced at her. Mr. Park is offering you good money for this job. Maybe it's time to let go of some of your other work. Give yourself room to breathe. I need to work. I can't just sit around doing nothing. Taking care of yourself isn't nothing, and taking care of those children is a full-time job, even if you're only there overnight. Imani knew Mrs. Chen was right, but the idea of reducing her hours, of having time to think and feel and process, was terrifying. She'd built her entire life around exhaustion, because exhaustion meant she didn't have to face the guilt and grief that had been waiting for her for 12 years. I'll think about it, Imani said, which they both knew meant no. Mrs. Chen dropped her off at her apartment building with a kind smile and a gentle reminder to get some sleep. Imani trudged up the 3 flights of stairs to her studio, unlocked the door, and stood in the middle of her tiny space, too tired to even take off her shoes. Her phone buzzed. Jin-Woo Park again. The twins are asking when you're coming back. I told them tonight. I hope that's still the plan? Imani looked around her apartment. At the photos of Keisha and Marcus. At the bare minimum existence she'd created for herself. At the life she'd been living for 12 years that had felt like penance, but was really just slow self-destruction. And then she thought about Minjun and Sora, about the way they'd smiled at her this morning, about Sora's drawing, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could take her broken pieces and build something that mattered. She texted back, "Tonight, at 8, I'll be there." Then she set her alarm for 5 hours from now, fell into bed, fully clothed, and surrendered to sleep. For the first time in 12 years, she didn't dream about the fire. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Imani with its steadiness. Every evening at 8, she arrived at the Park mansion. Every morning at 7:30, Mrs. Chen relieved her. In between, she sat with 2 traumatized children and taught them that healing wasn't a straight line, that setbacks didn't mean failure, that some nights were harder than others and that was okay. The twins' progress wasn't linear. Some nights they slept peacefully from 9 until 6. Other nights, they woke up screaming from the nightmares and it took hours to calm them down. Some nights they wanted to talk about their mother and cry and rage at the unfairness of it all. Other nights, they wanted to pretend everything was normal and play games and talk about anything except the trauma they were carrying. Imani learned to read their moods, to know when they needed gentle conversation and when they needed silence, when they needed the structure of box breathing, and when they needed the freedom to just feel whatever they were feeling without trying to fix it. She also learned about Jin-Woo Park, though not from the man himself. He was a ghost in his own house, appearing briefly to kiss his children goodnight before disappearing into his office for hours. Imani would see him on the monitor sometimes, head in his hands, or pacing his office, or staring at something on his computer screen with the kind of intensity that suggested he was trying to solve an impossible problem. Mrs. Chen filled in the gaps. Jin-Woo's company was in trouble. A hostile takeover attempt that had been brewing for months was coming to a head. He was hemorrhaging investors and market share, and the board of directors was losing faith in his leadership. "He's trying to save the company his wife died for," Mrs. Chen said one morning as she drove Imani home. "But I don't think he wants to save it anymore. I think he resents it. Every minute he spends working is a minute he could have spent with Catherine. Every success feels hollow because she's not here to share it." Imani understood that kind of guilt, the success that felt like betrayal, the achievements that meant nothing because the people you loved most couldn't celebrate with you. On her 15th night at the Park mansion, everything changed. She arrived at 8 as usual to find the house in chaos. Mrs. Chen met her at the door with a worried expression. "Mr. Park's mother is here," she said quietly. "She showed up an hour ago unannounced. She's upstairs with the twins right now and it's not going well." Imani could hear raised voices from the second floor. A woman's voice, sharp and imperious, speaking rapidly in Korean. Jin-Woo's voice responding in the same language, equally sharp. And underneath it all, the sound of Sora crying. "What's happening?" Imani asked. "Mrs. Park, the grandmother, she doesn't approve of Mr. Park's choices since Catherine died. She thinks the twins need discipline and structure, not coddling. She thinks he's raising them to be weak." Mrs. Chen's expression was pained. "She doesn't understand trauma. She thinks they just need to move on." Imani took the stairs 2 at a time, following the sound of Sora's crying. She found them in the twins' playroom. Jin-Woo standing rigid, with barely controlled anger. An elegant older woman in expensive clothes, arms crossed, expression cold, and the twins, Minjun holding Sora while she sobbed into his shoulder. The older woman was speaking in English now, her accent precise and cutting. "They are 7 years old, Jin-Woo. 7, and they still cry like babies over something that happened 6 months ago. You are making them weak by allowing this behavior." "They watched their mother die," Jin-Woo said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They are not weak. They are traumatized. There's a difference. Trauma is an excuse. What they need is discipline, a proper Korean education, not this American permissiveness that allows them to wallow in their feelings." Imani should have stayed quiet, should have let Jin-Woo handle his mother. But she looked at Sora, sobbing and shaking, and something in her snapped. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the argument. "But telling traumatized children to just get over it is not only cruel, it's psychologically damaging." The older woman turned to her, eyes narrowing. "And who are you?" "I'm Imani. I help take care of the twins overnight." "The help has opinions now?" Mrs. Park's tone was withering. "Jin-Woo, are you really allowing your household staff to speak to me this way?" "Imani isn't staff," Jin-Woo said. "She's the reason my children can sleep again. She's done more for them in 2 weeks than anyone else has done in 6 months. And if she has something to say about their care, I want to hear it." Mrs. Park looked between her son and Imani with an expression of pure disdain. "You are allowing a stranger to raise your children, a cleaning woman with no credentials, no education, no proper training. Do you know how this looks?" "I don't care how it looks. I care that my children are healing." "They are not healing. They are being enabled. There is a difference." Mrs. Park turned to the twins. "Your mother would be ashamed of how weak you have become. She would want you to be strong, to honor her memory by being brave." Sora's sobs intensified. Minjun's face went pale, and Imani saw his hands start to shake. He was having a panic attack. Imani moved to the twins immediately, kneeling beside them. "Minjun, look at me. Box breathing. Can you do it with me?" "Do not encourage this," Mrs. Park snapped. "He needs to learn to control himself." "He's 7 years old and having a panic attack," Imani said, not looking away from Minjun. "He's not being weak. His body is responding to trauma. This is a medical reaction, not a character flaw. You dare lecture me about children? You who have no children of your own?" The words hit like a physical blow. Imani felt her chest tighten, felt the old familiar guilt rise up and threaten to choke her. She had no children of her own because the children she was supposed to protect had died, because she'd failed them, because she didn't deserve to care for anyone after what she'd done. But then she felt a small hand slip into hers. Sora, still crying, was holding on to her like a lifeline, and Minjun was trying to breathe through his panic, trying to follow her instructions even though his grandmother's words had triggered every fear he carried. These children needed her. Right now, in this moment, she was exactly what they needed. "You're right," Imani said, her voice steady despite the pain. "I don't have children of my own. I lost the ones I was caring for in a fire when I was 16. They died because I fell asleep when I should have been watching them. So, yes, I know what it's like to fail the people you love." I know what it's like to carry guilt that feels like it's going to crush you. And that's exactly why I understand what these children are going through. Mrs. Park stared at her, clearly not expecting that response. Minjun and Sora are not weak, Imani continued. They are surviving an impossible situation with grace and courage. They wake up every day and face a world that took their mother from them violently and without warning. They sleep in a house where they witness trauma. They carry guilt that children should never have to carry, wondering if they could have saved her, if they did something wrong, if they're being punished for something they can't name. And they are still here, still fighting, still trying. That is not weakness. That is extraordinary strength. The room was silent except for Sora's quieting sobs and Minjun's gradually steadying breathing. Jin-Woo spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. Mother, I need you to leave. Jin-Woo, now, you don't get to come into my home and tell my children that their pain is weakness. You don't get to shame them for surviving trauma. You don't get to question the choices I'm making to help them heal. I am your mother. I am trying to help. Then help by respecting my boundaries and trusting that I know what my children need. Mrs. Park drew herself up to her full height. You are making a mistake. These children need the structure and discipline, not this emotional indulgence. And hiring this woman, this stranger with her own obvious trauma, to care for them is irresponsible and dangerous. This woman has done more for my family in 2 weeks than you've done in 6 months. So yes, I trust her. More than I trust you right now. The words hung in the air, brutal and final. Mrs. Park's face went tight with anger and hurt. She looked at her son, at her grandchildren, at Imani, and Imani saw the moment she made her decision. I see. You have chosen your path. When this arrangement falls apart, when these children are still broken, and that woman has taken advantage of your desperation, do not call me asking for help. She swept out of the room with the dignity of someone who'd perfected the art of the cutting exit. They heard her footsteps on the stairs, the front door opening and closing, the sound of a car engine starting. And then there was silence. Jin-Woo looked at Imani and the twins, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion and regret. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry she said those things. It's not your fault, Imani said. She was still kneeling beside the twins, Sora's hand in hers, Minjun's breathing finally returning to normal. She had no right to speak to you that way, to speak to any of you that way. She's scared, Imani said. She doesn't understand trauma, so she sees weakness where there's actually survival. She loves you, and she loves the twins, but she doesn't know how to help, so she's trying to use the tools she knows. Structure, discipline, traditional values. It's not malicious. It's just ignorant. Jin-Woo shook his head. You're more charitable than she deserves. I'm not being charitable. I'm being realistic. Hurt people. And your mother is hurting too, even if she won't admit it. She lost her daughter-in-law. She's watching her son struggle. She's seeing her grandchildren in pain, and she doesn't know how to fix it. So she's lashing out. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't, but it makes it human. Sora tugged on Imani's hand. Is it true? About your brother and sister? Imani had never told the twins the full story. She'd mentioned the fire, but not the details, not the depth of her guilt. But Mrs. Park had dragged it out into the open, and now there was no avoiding it. Yes, Imani said. It's true. I was supposed to be watching them. I fell asleep. When I woke up, the apartment was on fire. I got out, but I couldn't get to them. They died. And it was my fault. It wasn't your fault, Minjun said fiercely. You were just a kid. You didn't start the fire. No, but I was responsible for keeping them safe, and I didn't. That's what Dad says too, Sora said quietly. He says it's his fault Mom died because he should have been home. But it's not his fault. The bad men did it. Imani looked at Jin-Woo. Their eyes met, and in that moment, they understood each other completely. Two people carrying impossible guilt for tragedies they didn't cause but couldn't prevent. Two people punishing themselves for being human. Maybe, Imani said slowly, we're both wrong. Maybe it wasn't my fault that Keisha and Marcus died, and maybe it wasn't your dad's fault that your mom died. Maybe bad things just happen sometimes, and we're all doing the best we can to survive them. Do you really believe that? Jin-Woo asked. I'm trying to, Imani admitted. Some days I believe it more than others. But being with your children, helping them, it makes me think that maybe my siblings didn't die for nothing. Maybe I can take what I learned from losing them and use it to help other people who are hurting. Minjun looked at his father. Dad, do you think Mom would be mad at us for still being sad? Jin-Woo crossed the room and knelt beside his children, pulling them both into a hug. Imani moved back to give them space, but Sora reached out and grabbed her hand, pulling her into the circle. Your mother would not be mad, Jin-Woo said, his voice breaking. She would hold you and tell you that it's okay to be sad, that it's okay to miss her, that it's okay to be scared and angry and confused. She would tell you that healing takes time, and that some days are going to be harder than others, and that you're allowed to feel however you feel. How do you know? Sora asked. Because that's what she told me when my father died. I was about your age, and I cried every night for months. My mother, your grandmother, she told me to be strong, to be the man of the family, to stop crying. But your mom, she took my hand and she said, it's okay to be sad. Sad means you loved him. And love doesn't just disappear because someone dies. They sat there on the playroom floor, the four of them tangled together in a complicated knot of shared grief and fragile hope. Imani felt tears on her face, and wasn't sure if they were hers or Sora's, or Jin-Woo's. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe grief was communal like that, one person's tears mixing with another's until you couldn't tell where one pain ended and another began. Eventually, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. She took one look at the scene and quietly retreated, understanding that this was a moment that needed space. When they finally untangled, when the twins' eyes were drooping with exhaustion and Jin-Woo's face was raw with emotion, Imani stood up. I should get them ready for bed, she said. I'll help, Jin-Woo said. They went through the bedtime routine together, the four of them moving in comfortable synchronicity. Teeth brushing, pajamas, arranging stuffed animals. The twins climbed into bed, holding hands across the gap as always. Dad? Minjun said, will Grandma come back? Eventually, but I'm going to talk to her first. Make sure she understands that she can't speak to you or Imani that way. I don't want her to be mad at us. She's not mad at you. She's confused and scared and dealing with it badly. But that's not your problem to fix. That's between me and her. Okay. Jin-Woo kissed both twins goodnight, then paused by the door. He looked at Imani. Can we talk? After they're asleep? Of course. Imani settled into her usual chair between the beds. The twins were exhausted from the emotional upheaval, and they both fell asleep within 20 minutes. She watched them for a while, making sure they were truly resting, then quietly left the room. Jin-Woo was waiting in the hallway. My office? She followed him downstairs to a room she'd never entered before. It was large and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. But what struck Imani was how lived in it felt. Papers everywhere, multiple computer monitors, coffee cups in various states of fullness. This was where Jin-Woo spent his nights, working himself to exhaustion the same way Imani did. Thank you, he said as soon as they were inside, for what you said to my mother, for standing up for the twins, for staying even after she was so cruel to you. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Still, you didn't have to share your story. That must have been painful. It was, but it was also necessary. The twins needed to know that they're not alone, that other people have survived terrible things and found ways to keep living. Jin-Woo poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, then offered one to Imani. She shook her head. My mother was right about one thing, he said. I have been letting a stranger take care of my children. I've been trusting you with the most important people in my world, and I barely know anything about you. What do you want to know? Everything. Who you are, what you want, why you work yourself to exhaustion, why you're helping us. Imani sat down in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I work 3 jobs because I don't know how to stop. I've been running from my grief for 12 years, and if I slow down, it catches up with me. I live in a studio apartment with photos of my dead siblings on every wall because I'm punishing myself for surviving when they didn't. I help your children because being with them is the first time in 12 years that I felt like my pain might actually mean something. That maybe I can take the worst thing that ever happened to me and use it to help someone else survive the worst thing that ever happened to them. Jin-Woo was quiet for a long moment. We're not so different, you and I. No, we're not. I've been running too. Into work. Into security measures. Into anything that keeps me from having to sit with the knowledge that my wife died because I prioritized a business meeting over her phone calls. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? If I'd answered even one of those calls, if I'd gone home when she asked me to, if I'd installed better security, You'd still be human, Imani interrupted. Still be someone who makes mistakes and has limited information and can't predict the future. You can torture yourself with if only for the rest of your life, but it won't change what happened. It'll just keep you trapped in the past. Is that what you've been doing? Staying trapped? Imani thought about her studio apartment, her 3 jobs, her carefully constructed life of exhaustion and isolation. Yes, but being here with your children, it's starting to feel like maybe I don't have to stay trapped forever. Jin-Woo smiled, a small, sad smile. They're helping you too. They are. More than they know. Imani, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay, are you planning to stay? Long term? Or is this just a temporary thing until you figure out what you really want to do with your life? It was a fair question, and Imani didn't have a good answer. 2 weeks ago, she would have said temporary, would have insisted that this was just a job, just a way to make money, just something to do until she figured out what came next. But now, sitting in Jin-Woo's office, thinking about Minjun and Sora sleeping upstairs, about the way they'd pulled her into their family hug, about Sora's drawing that she kept in her bag and looked at whenever she felt like she was drowning, she realized something had shifted. She cared about these children. Really cared. Enough that the thought of leaving them made her chest ache. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know what I want long term because I've spent 12 years just trying to survive day to day. But I know that right now, being here feels right, and I know that I'm not ready to leave yet. That's good enough for me, Jin-Woo said. For now, that's enough. 3 months later, Imani stood in the kitchen of the Park mansion at 6 in the morning, making pancakes. This had become her routine. She'd arrive at 8 in the evening, spend the night with the twins, and then stay through breakfast before heading home to sleep. She'd quit her job at the hospital a month ago. Then, 2 weeks ago, she'd reduced her hours at Lincoln Elementary to part-time. The money Jin-Woo paid her was more than enough to cover her expenses, and Mrs. Rodriguez had been understanding when Imani explained that she needed to focus on the twins. Those children need you, Mrs. Rodriguez had said. And honestly, you seem happier than I've ever seen you. Like you finally found where you belong. Imani hadn't argued because it was true. She was happier. The nightmares about the fire still came, but less frequently. The guilt was still there, but it had softened into something more manageable. She'd even started seeing a therapist, using the health insurance Jin-Woo had provided, working through 12 years of unprocessed trauma, 1 session at a time. The twins thundered down the stairs. Minjun in the lead as always, Sora right behind him. They looked different than they had 3 months ago. Healthier, more rested. The shadows under their eyes had faded. They smiled more easily. They laughed. They still had hard nights, still woke up from nightmares sometimes, still had moments of panic when something triggered a memory. But the hard nights were outnumbered by the good ones now, and they'd learned how to manage their fear instead of being consumed by it. Pancakes, Sora announced, climbing onto a stool at the kitchen island. Can mine be a butterfly today? I want a dinosaur, Minjun said. A butterfly and a dinosaur. I can make that happen. Jin-Woo appeared in the doorway, looking less exhausted than usual. The hostile takeover attempt had been resolved 2 months ago, not through business maneuvering, but through a surprisingly simple solution. Jin-Woo had stepped back from day-to-day operations, promoted David Kim to CEO, and taken on a consulting role that gave him more time at home. The board had been shocked. The business press had been confused. But Jin-Woo had been certain. I built that company for my family, he'd told Imani. But then the company took my family from me. Time to get my priorities straight. The company was thriving under David's leadership, and Jin-Woo seemed genuinely happy with his decision. He spent his mornings with the twins now, took them to school, picked them up, helped with homework. He was present in a way he hadn't been able to be before. Good morning, he said, accepting the coffee Imani handed him. Their fingers brushed, and Imani felt the familiar flutter in her chest that she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. Something had shifted between them. It had started small, conversations that lasted longer than necessary, glances that held a moment too long, the way Jin-Woo's face lit up when she arrived each evening, the way Imani found herself thinking about him during the day when she should have been sleeping, but they'd both been careful not to acknowledge it. The twins came first. Healing came first. Everything else could wait, except it was getting harder to wait. I have news, Jin-Woo said as Imani flipped a butterfly-shaped pancake. My mother wants to visit this weekend. She's been in therapy, working on understanding trauma. She wants to apologize to all of you. The twins exchanged glances. Will she be nice this time? Minjun asked. She's going to try, and if she's not, she knows she'll be asked to leave again. Okay, Sora said. We can give her another chance. Imani served the pancakes, butterfly, and dinosaur as requested. She sat with the family as they ate, as she did every morning now, and marveled at how normal this felt. How right. After breakfast, Jin-Woo drove the twins to school. Imani usually left around this time, but today Jin-Woo asked her to wait. There's something I need to talk to you about, he said. Imani's heart rate picked up. Okay. When Jin-Woo returned from the school run, he found Imani in the garden, sitting on the bench where she often sat when she needed to think. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The twins are doing so much better, he said. They are. They're remarkable kids. Because of you. You gave them the tools to heal. You showed them that survival was possible. I just sat with them through the hard parts. They did the real work. Jin-Woo turned to face her. Imani, these last 3 months have been transformative, not just for the twins, but for me. Watching you with them, learning from the way you approach trauma and healing, it's changed how I see everything. Jin-Woo, let me finish, please. He took a breath. When Catherine died, I thought I'd never feel anything again, except guilt and grief. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life going through the motions, taking care of my children, but never really living. But then you came into our lives and slowly, without me even realizing it was happening, you reminded me that it's possible to carry grief and still find joy, to honor the past and still have a future. Imani's throat tightened. You're doing the same for me. I know this is complicated. I know we both have a lot of healing still to do. I know the twins need stability, and we can't rush into anything that might disrupt that. But Imani, I need you to know that I care about you, not just as someone who helps my children, but as a person, as a woman who is brave and kind and has survived impossible things with grace. I care about you too, Imani whispered. More than I probably should. There's no should when it comes to feelings. They just are. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their confessions hanging between them. So, what do we do? Imani asked. We take it slow. We keep the twins' well-being as our first priority. We give ourselves time to heal individually before we try to build something together. But we stop pretending that there's nothing here. We acknowledge it and we see where it goes. That sounds terrifying. It is. But I've learned that the things worth having are usually terrifying. Imani thought about Minjun and Sora, about how terrified she'd been to care about them, to let herself matter to someone again, and about how that terror had been worth it, because they'd given her something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Purpose, connection, hope. Okay, she said, slow, honest, with the twins' well-being as the priority. Exactly. Jin-Woo reached out and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. Two people who had spent years building walls around themselves, choosing to take them down brick by brick. There's one more thing, Jin-Woo said. I talked to the twins about making this arrangement permanent, about you moving into the guest house so you're not commuting every day. They were very enthusiastic about the idea. Imani's eyes widened. Jin-Woo, that's a lot. I know, you don't have to decide right now, but I want you to know that you're not just an employee to us. You're family, and family doesn't have to commute. Family, the word settled over Imani like a warm blanket. She thought about her studio apartment with its photos of ghosts. She thought about the life she'd built around punishment and isolation. And then she thought about pancakes shaped like butterflies and dinosaurs. About two children who called her by her first name and held her hand when they were scared. About a man who understood grief and guilt and the long, slow work of healing. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. That evening, Imani arrived at 8 as usual, but instead of just the twins waiting for her, there was a surprise. Jin-Woo's mother, Mrs. Park, stood in the foyer looking uncomfortable and determined. Imani, she said formally, thank you for seeing me. Mrs. Park, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Mrs. Park's English was careful, her pride clearly warring with her guilt. I was cruel to you and to my grandchildren. I said terrible things born from my own fear and ignorance. I have been attending therapy, learning about trauma, about grief, about the ways we hurt the people we love when we don't understand their pain. Thank you for saying that, Imani said. My grandchildren are thriving under your care. They are healing in ways I did not think possible. You have given my son his life back. You have given all of us hope, and I repaid you with cruelty. Mrs. Park's eyes were wet. I am deeply sorry. Imani saw the twins watching from the stairs, saw Jin-Woo standing in the doorway of his office, giving them space but remaining close in case he was needed. I accept your apology, Imani said, and I want you to know that I understand. You love your family. You were trying to help in the only way you knew how. That's not something to apologize for. You are very gracious. I'm just realistic. Hurt people. Healing people help people heal. You're choosing healing now. That takes courage. Mrs. Park nodded, then did something that surprised everyone. She bowed, a formal gesture of respect and gratitude. When she straightened, there were tears on her face. Thank you for loving my grandchildren, she said quietly. Thank you for helping my son. Thank you for being what this family needed when we didn't even know what that was. The twins came down the stairs then, hesitant but hopeful. Mrs. Park knelt to their level, and Imani watched as 3 generations of the Park family began the work of rebuilding what had been broken. Later that night, after Mrs. Park had left, after the twins had fallen asleep peacefully for the 100th night in a row, Imani sat in her usual chair and thought about everything that had changed in 3 months. She'd come to this house as a cleaning woman who'd stumbled into a crisis. She'd stayed because 2 traumatized children had needed someone who understood. And she'd become part of a family that was learning that healing was possible. that grief and joy could coexist, that broken people could help each other become whole. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jin-Woo, who she knew was watching from his office. "Have you thought about the guest house?" Imani looked around the twins' room. At Sora's drawings covering the walls. At Minjun's rock collection, carefully organized on shelves. At the space between the beds where she sat every night, keeping watch, bearing witness to their healing. She thought about her studio apartment with its shrine to guilt. She thought about 12 years of running from pain. She thought about Keisha and Marcus and what they would want for her. Not punishment, not isolation, not a life half-lived in penance for surviving. They would want her to be happy, to heal, to take the love she'd given them and give it to others who needed it, to transform her pain into purpose. She texted back, "Yes, I'll move in." Jinwoo's response came immediately. "Really? Really, but I have one condition." "Anything." "I want to bring photos of Keisha and Marcus. I want them to be part of this story too. I want the twins to know them, to hear stories about them. I don't want to leave my siblings behind in order to move forward. Of course, they're part of your story, which means they're part of our story now too." Imani felt tears on her face, but for the first time in 12 years, they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, of hope. She looked at the twins, sleeping peacefully. She thought about Jin-Woo in his office, building a new life from the ruins of his old one. She thought about Mrs. Park, swallowing her pride to apologize. She thought about Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Rodriguez and all the people who'd shown her kindness when she couldn't show it to herself. She thought about a night 3 months ago when she'd heard a child's whimper and broken her own rule about getting involved. She thought about how that one decision had changed everything. Sometimes healing started with a single breath. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, 4 counts hold. And sometimes it started with a single choice. To show up, to care, to let yourself matter to someone again, even when it was terrifying. Imani pulled out Sora's drawing, the one she carried everywhere now. 2 small figures and 1 larger one, standing under the stars. Imani teached us to breathe. She'd taught them to breathe, but they'd taught her something too. They'd taught her that survival wasn't the same as living, that you could honor the people you'd lost without sacrificing the life you still had, that healing was possible, even when it felt impossible, that broken people could find each other in the darkness and help each other find their way back to the light. Minjun stirred in his sleep, reaching across to make sure his sister's hand was still in his. Sora murmured something peaceful, her face relaxed in true rest. And Imani sat between them, keeping watch, bearing witness, and finally, after 12 long years, allowing herself to believe that maybe she deserved this. This peace, this purpose, this family, this life. Outside the window, the stars shone over the Park mansion. Inside, a family slept, and in the space between sleeping and waking, between grief and healing, between the past and the future, there was hope. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.